Your coffee is trying to warn you. You probably didn't notice it this morning. Your regular cup of coffee, same place, but this time it costs more. Again. Maybe you blame the cafe or the economy, but what if that cup of coffee was trying to warn you about the future, about your money? And what if I told you that latte is screaming at you about something bigger, something global, something personal? A few years ago, the same cup of coffee probably cost you $3.50. Now it's closer to $5. But it's not just coffee, it's eggs, rent, gas. Prices are rising everywhere, and that's inflation. But inflation isn't just about rising prices. It's about what your money can no longer do. It's the silent tax eating away at your future. Sip by sip, day by day. Do you know how scary inflation can be? Let me tell you a quick story. In 1946, Hungary printed a single banknote worth 100 quintillion. Yes, quintillion. Why? Because inflation got so bad, money became literally worthless. People burned cash to stay warm. Not because they were rich, because it was cheaper than firewood. And you might think that would never happen today. But inflation doesn't always look like chaos. Sometimes it creeps in quietly, like your $5 coffee, or your shrinking paycheck, or your landlord raising the rent. What is inflation? You ever look at the grocery bill and wonder, wasn't this cheaper just a few months ago? It's not your imagination. That feeling, the slow creeping pressure like your wallet's shrinking even when you are not spending more? That's what inflation do. Inflation is what happens when the value of your money starts to fade. Not overnight, little by little. So subtle most people don't notice until it's already robbed them. Imagine this, you worked all week, traded your time for $100. But when you go to spend it, the same $100 buys less. Same dollar bills, same hours worked. But now it doesn't stretch the way it used to. That's the silent tax most people never see it coming. In economics, we track inflation with something called the Consumer Price Index, or CPI. It's a way to measure how much prices rise over time. But here's the truth most economists won't say out loud. You don't need a fancy index to feel the pressure. You feel it in your rent, at the gas station, when you hesitate at checkout, wondering if you should put something back. Inflation isn't just numbers on a chart. It's the erosion of your power to live, to save, to dream. And if you don't learn how to protect yourself, it will steal your future, $1 at a time. What causes inflation? So if inflation is the silent thief, who's holding the crowbar? Let's break it down. In terms of crisis, wars, pandemics, financial collapse, governments do what they've always done. They print money. It sounds like a good idea at first. Pump cash into the economy. Give help to people to stimulate growth. But here's the problem. When you flood the system with more dollars, while the number of goods stays the same, you're not creating more wealth. You're just spreading the value thinner. More money chasing the same loaf of bread, the bread gets more expensive. Not because it's more delicious, but because your dollar is worth less. Then there's the supply chains break. Factories shut down, ports clog. Suddenly the stuff we need becomes harder to get. And when things are scarce, prices shoot up. Not because they are better, but because we can't get enough. And what about businesses? They raise wages to keep good people, especially when living costs soar. But the cost? They pass it on to you and me. In the price of a burger, a haircut, a cup of coffee. And that's how it happens. Inflation isn't just one villain. It's a chain reaction of fear, pressure, scarcity, and survival. It's not just economics, it's human nature, multiplied across an entire system. And unless you understand what's causing it, you'll always be on the receiving end. But why can't prices just stay the same? You've probably wondered this before. If inflation hurts, if it eats away at your paycheck, if it makes groceries, rent, even your morning coffee more expensive, then why don't they just stop it? Why can't prices stay the same? Why can't inflation be zero? Here's the truth that might surprise you. A little inflation is not just tolerated, it's encouraged. In fact, most central banks around the world, like the US Federal Reserve, have a target. And that target, roughly 2% a year. Not because it's magic, not because it's scientific, but because it's what they believe keeps the machine running. See, when prices are expected to rise, even just a little, it nudges people to act. you are more likely to buy that car or that new washing machine today, because tomorrow it might cost more. And what happens when more people spend? Companies make more money. They hire more workers, and those workers have more to spend. That spending creates more demand. That demand drives prices up. Even on things we have to buy, like food, clothes, and medicine, the cost creeps upwards, and round and around we go. So yes, rising prices can hurt, but in this system, a little bit of inflation is seen as a sign that the economy is alive. Too little inflation, the flame flickers. Too much, it roars out of control. The balance, this dance of just enough inflation, is how governments try to keep the fire going without burning the house down. Then how does inflation get out of hand? It usually starts with something simple. We want more than the world can give. Imagine this, everyone suddenly has more money in their pocket. Maybe it's from stimulus checks, maybe from easy loans or government spending. We feel safer, we feel freer, we spend on groceries, on gas, on that shiny new phone. But there's a problem. The stuff we want is not arriving fast enough. Factories are slowed down, ports are jammed, suppliers can't keep up. More dollars chasing fewer goods, that's the perfect recipe for prices to skyrocket. And when that happens, not just in one sector, but across the entire economy, it creates something dangerous: runaway inflation. It's happened before in countries where governments printed too much money too fast, where economic growth surged, but supply stayed stuck, where prices doubled, then tripled. And then money lost meaning, because once inflation takes off, it doesn't just make things expensive, it erodes trust in your paycheck, in your savings, in the system. And when people stop believing in the value of money, that's when the real danger begins. Inflation is like a fire. Too small and the economy freezes. Too big and it burns everything we've built. So who holds the fire extinguisher? Enter the central banks, the quiet giants behind the curtain. They don't run your local shop. They don't sell your morning coffee. But they shape the invisible forces that decide what those things cost. Their most powerful tool? Interest rates. When the economy is running too hot, prices rising too fast, they raise interest rates. That means borrowing money becomes more expensive, which means people borrow less, spend less, and the economy cools down. It's like turning down the heat before the pot boils over. And that's not all. Central banks can also adjust reserve requirements, the amount of money banks must keep in the vault instead of lending out. More reserve equals less lending, equals to slower economy. Less reserves equal more lending equals growth. They're constantly trying to balance between too little and too much, between freedom and restraint, between inflation and collapse. And it's not just the banks. Governments can also step in. Raise taxes, people have less to spend. Cut spending, less money flowing through the system. That cools inflation. But if the opposite happens, tax cuts, stimulus checks, heavy spending, that fuels demand and potentially fans the inflation flame. So yes, there are tools, powerful ones, but they are not magic. They require precision, timing, and the willingness to make hard decisions, even when they are unpopular. Because in the end, controlling inflation isn't just about prices. It's about keeping balance in a world that's always tipping. Why is it so hard to control inflation? They say inflation is just numbers, a percentage, a rate, a technical problem with a technical fix. But if that were true, why does it feel like chasing smoke in a burning room? Here's the truth. Once inflation takes hold, it's not just prices that rise, it's fear, it's expectation, and that is much harder to fight. Because inflation doesn't just live in spreadsheets, it lives in people's minds. When you expect prices to rise, you act differently. You spend faster, you stockpile, you demand higher wages. And businesses, they raise prices, just in case. Now imagine trying to stop that cycle in a world flooded with cash, but with shelves that are still half empty. We saw this recently. Stimulus checks, easy credit, a world recovering from shutdowns. Money was everywhere, but goods stuck in ports, factories shut, shortages everywhere. More money plus fewer goods equals higher prices. It's basic economics. But when expectations get involved, it's no longer just math, it's psychology, it's momentum. You can raise interest rates, you can cut spending, you can tighten reserves. But if the public believes prices will keep rising, the fire keeps burning. So why is inflation so hard to control? Because we are not just managing supply and demand, we're managing trust in the currency, in the system, in the people who say we've got this under control. Who inflation hurts most? Inflation doesn't hit everyone the same. It's not fair. It never was. If you're living paycheck to paycheck, inflation isn't just a headline. It's your everyday reality. Your rent goes up. Groceries, more expensive. Transportation, eating into what little you have left. But your income stays the same. Maybe it trickles up, but never enough to catch up. And while you're trying to figure out how to stretch $50 into a week of meals, someone else is making money off the inflation that's draining you. Here's the hard truth. The poor gets punished, the middle class gets squeezed, and the wealthy, they get richer. Because they don't just spend money, they own assets. They rise with inflation, while your cash loses power. This is the dark side of inflation no one talks about. It widens the gap, it rewards ownership, and it punishes survival. But here's the part that they don't tell you. You don't have to stay stuck. You can learn the game. You can own the very assets that protect you. You just need to start. You were never meant to survive inflation. You were meant to beat it. How the rich use inflation to their advantage. The rich don't fear inflation. They don't panic when prices rise. They plan for it, and then they profit from it. They buy assets, real estate, stocks, businesses because they know something most people don't. As the dollar drops in value, these assets, they go up. And here's the part that stings. They often use debt to do it, but not the kind that buries you. They use strategic debt, borrowing cheap money at low interest to buy things that grow in value. While you're told to save money, to play it safe, to wait for the storm to pass, they are out there owning the storm. Because saving cash during inflation, it's like pouring water into a bucket full of holes. But when you own assets, inflation isn't your enemy, it becomes your weapon. The rich didn't get rich by accident. They studied the game, they learned the rules, and now they play it better than anyone else. You can too, but first, you have to stop saving like a victim and start investing like a strategist. You weren't taught this in school. Not how inflation works, not how to build wealth, not how the system rewards those who play differently. Most of us weren't given the manual. We were told to save, to stay safe, to chase security, not freedom. But that doesn't mean you have to stay behind. Because the truth, the rules are out there. The playbook is real. And once you see inflation for what it really is, not just rising prices, but a signal, a force, a challenge, and a tool, you realize something powerful. You can invest, you can grow, you can build a life that doesn't depend on every single hour you work. If you have felt stuck, like no matter how hard you work, you can't get ahead, you're not crazy, you're not alone. And this system wasn't designed to make you wealthy. But you can learn to play the game. The coffee you drink each morning, it's more than just caffeine. It's a reminder to wake up, to see what's happening, and to take your power back. This is your moment. Your future depends on how you respond. Not to the price of coffee, but to the message it carries. Now's the time to grow, invest, learn, act. So let's get some wow money.